Hello students, I'm happy to connect with you with yet another aspect of the topic gender, school and society. Friends, taking you to a brief flashback of what we have seen in the previous classes. Gender, the socially constructed characteristics which decide what should be the role and position played by men and women in a society. We have also examined various perspectives of gender: historical perspective, sociological and cultural perspective, economic perspective, political perspective, and in all these perspectives what is reflected commonly is that there exists what is called gender discrimination in the Indian society. And statistically supported facts and evidences make it very clear that it is the female gender which get discriminated. Whether it is in the historical light or in the political light or in the economic light or in the socio-cultural light, we always see the discrimination that is meted out to the female gender. So today we shall see yet another important facet where you find the existence of gender bias, where you see the existence of gender discrimination. In my capacity as a teacher educator and in your capacity as a student teacher today and as a full-fledged teacher tomorrow, it is a matter of utmost importance that you and me should make ourselves very familiar with these bias existing in the education sector. And if at all there exists a bias, what can be done to overcome the bias? So as teachers, we are very much tied up with this education sector, and each and every aspect of the education sector has to be properly monitored by we who happen to be the stakeholders of education. So today we shall see about the gender bias in education sector. So I'll just give you in a brief nutshell what are the different aspects that we would be examining under the topic gender bias in education sector. And here again, as in the other areas where discrimination is seen, it is the girls or the women who are treated or who are discriminately treated even in the education sector. So now let us see this topic under the following heads. So starting with gender biased attitude of society. So we said there exists gender bias in education sector, and that is mainly because of the biased attitude of the society. How the society looks at girls, how the society looks at the role that has to be played by women. That has got a very great role with respect to the bias in the education sector. How biased is the attitude, the mindset of the society. That is reflected in gender biased attitude of society. Then we move on to the present scenario. When we talk about gender biased attitude, at least you may have this question in your mind that does this sort of an attitude exist even in 21st century? That is why I want to take your attention to the present scenario. Even though there is a biased attitude on the part of the society, the present scenario is different because it offers more positive picture for the upliftment of women. So we will have a look at the present scenario, that is the present attitude of the society towards girls and women and the roles and position that they play in the society. Then we are more concerned about what is the gender bias in education sector. So the third aspect is how biased is the education sector. And here I have also highlighted, when we talk about the education sector and the bias or discrimination existing in the education sector, we should understand that every classroom is a matter of great significance as far as the development of a child is concerned. Because every classroom is a microcosm. Microcosm means microcosm. That is a miniature. Every classroom is a miniature society. So in that sense, whatever happens in the classroom, a behavior, a spoken word or an unspoken word or an action on the part of the participants in a classroom, whether it is a teacher or a student, it has a great impact on each student. And because every classroom is a microcosm of the society, or a miniature society. So whatever the child experiences in a classroom, that grows along with the child. So when we understand the bias in education, so why we should understand the bias is because every classroom is a miniature society. So in such a society, the absence of bias, or a classroom should be free from such kind of bias, so that we can mold up a generation who are perfect, who are efficient to survive in every respect. So that is why here I have added significance of a classroom. When we talk about education sector, every classroom is significant and very essential that we should understand what are the bias prevailing in a classroom and make an all-out effort to remove or eliminate those bias. Then what can be done? So if at all there exists bias, what can be done? Then usually we understand the causes of a phenomenon, then come to the real concept or phenomenon. But here, in order to get a better picture, we should understand what exactly are the bias. This will enable you to arrive at the causes with greater clarity. So causative factors are responsible for bias in education. And lastly, even if the picture is very negative, there should always be a ray of hope. So what exactly is the ray of hope that we have with respect to the bias prevailing in education sector? Okay, so this is how we would approach the topic on gender bias in education sector. So first we would start with gender biased attitude of the society. What exactly do you mean by the gender biased attitude? It refers to certain misconceptions by the society, a biased outlook of the society. What kind of biased attitude does the society have? Basically, first and foremost, the society has assigned a stereotypical roles for both men and women, girls and boys. Girls are supposed to be engaged in certain tasks and boys for something else. They are meant for something else. So stereotypical roles. And the society cannot imagine a particular gender outside that role that they have framed for each gender. Then another aspect is, society generally believes, we are discussing about gender biased attitude of society. So another important bias that you find prevailing in the society is girls have got a particular behavior pattern as expected by the society. They are supposed to be very calm, neat and reticent in their behavior. Very calm, neat and reticent. Whereas boys can afford to be more dominant. But if the girls happen to be dominant in their behavior, they are unduly criticized. Boys can engage themselves in more active activities. More preferably outdoor activities are more preferred for boys, whereas for girls it is more of indoor activities within the four walls of a room. And then again, it is always believed that work and work pressure is beyond the ability of a woman to sustain. They are highly sensitive. So work and work pressure is always the domain of the male gender. That is something that is always meant for the menfolk of the society. So this is how the society has got a biased attitude towards both men and women. So now coming on to the present scenario. So when we talk about we have been talking about how biased is the attitude. So referring to a particular study conducted in 1990s, the study says that sitting in the same classroom, reading the same textbook, being taught by the same teacher, it is always two kinds of education that is received by girls and boys. This was actually the finding of that particular study carried out during the early 90s. Sitting in the same classroom, reading the same textbook, listening to the same teacher, it is different kind of education that is received by both boys and girls. So now we move on to the present scenario. So when I said there is a biased attitude on the part of the society, at least some of you may have this question arising in your mind. Living in this 21st century, as you said, teacher, does society have stereotypical roles assigned for both girls and boys? Do they make behavioral discrimination between boys and girls? Boys supposed to behave like this, girls are supposed to be like this, very meek and passive. Do they demarcate the roles of boys and girls? To a certain extent, these biased attitude prevails even today in this 21st century in an educated society. But a lot of change, we should accept the reality, a lot of change has happened in the present times. So that is what I would like to take your attention to, the present scenario. In the present scenario, what do you find? There are more opportunities open to girls. Girls are being given greater role in all social life, in the greater social roles. Whether at home or in their professional life, they are adorning different roles. So they are given more opportunities, more of social roles. There is greater involvement of women in all walks of life. That is an important, undeniable aspect of the present scenario. And also, the present scenario says that when girls starts education along with boys, they continue education with boys. And at times they are at par or even above boys in their academic credentials. But at some point of time, whether it is at a secondary or high secondary or at their graduate level, after that point of education, it is found that as far as their career or professional achievement of women are concerned, they lag much behind the boys. And this is very well statistically supported by the 2011 census, which says that the literacy rate for males 84%, whereas for females somewhere around 65%. So this difference in the literacy rate itself is an indicator of the fact that at some point of time, girls miss out in the race with boys. So that is in a nutshell the present scenario. Even though more opportunities, more freedom of expression, more independence in thinking, in their thought process has been afforded to women, even then their statistically supported evidences suggest that women or girls have a long way to go as far as education and further employment opportunities are concerned. So that is where we stand at present. Then, how biased is education sector? How biased is education sector? So we need to know what are the different kinds of discrimination that is shown towards the girls or women as far as education is concerned. So before we move on, as I mentioned earlier, before we move on to the bias in education sector, it's very important that you should realize what is the significance, because the bias in education sector is an area of crucial importance, especially as stakeholders of education, as teachers who play a crucial role in the education sector. It's very important for us. One reason why it's very important is because every classroom is highly significant, because the classroom represents a microcosm of the society, or it represents a miniature society. So any loopholes, any negativities existing in the classroom will have its impact on children. So that is why understanding the bias in education sector and understanding what can be done to overpower the same becomes a matter of great importance as far as we teachers are concerned. And the answer is, why is it important? Because the classroom happens to be a microcosm of society. So with this strong background, let us once again move back to the bias existing in education sector. So if you take the case of textbooks, the portrayal of women, as we said earlier, always stereotypical. Women are always portrayed, given a portrait of a certain typical roles in the society. And outside that boundary, it is not generally a welcomed arena, a welcomed area of functioning for girls. They are assigned a particular role or a particular profession considered as suitable for girls. Even the textbook portray the same. And if you look at certain illustrations, pictures given in the textbooks, it is always girls are portrayed as very meek, very submissive, very passive, whereas boys highly brave, chivalrous, courageous, outspoken, those who have freedom of expression. That is how the boys are portrayed. So when small children at a very young age, when they start growing up with this idea, with this concept in mind, this idea also grows up with them. And when they grow up to be the future citizens, it is with this mindset that they look at society. It is with this mindset that they behave with the opposite sex, with the opposite gender. So that is a great anomaly, a great drawback that exists in the education sector. And not only that, there are study findings which show that, which support the fact that a lion's share, a major share, a lion's share of teachers' attention, time, energy that they invest in the classroom is always allocated for the boys. That's again a study finding. It supports that greater share of teachers' attention is always for boys. And maybe unintentionally or intentionally, the leadership roles that require organizational ability gets assigned to the boys. So these are some of the anomalies that we find existing in the education sector that may create a rift, a divide between girls and boys right from a very young age. And it is with this rift or divide or with this difference in their mind that they grow up with two different mindsets. And that is one major reason for the atrocides, for all the anomalies, the negative impact that the society has when these children grow up and reach adulthood. So these are some of the bias that is existing in the education sector. So now our next area of concern is what can be done to overcome the same. Naturally, the first and foremost area that has to be seen is the curriculum framers, the teachers who are the ones who really transact the curriculum in the classroom should understand the areas where such kinds of bias exist. And in the framing of the curriculum, in the framing of the syllabi, they should take proper care to see to it that such mistakes do not recur again. So that an equity and equality is provided or afforded to both the gender. We have already seen equity. Equity is need-based. According to the need of each gender, education should be provided. Equality, equal share, equal opportunity should be given to both the gender. So the curriculum framer should keep in mind that the principles of equity and the principle of equality is followed in framing the curriculum. And again, women who have contributed in different fields, whether it is politics or whether it is in the field of entertainment or in the field of technology or in the field of medicine. So the women who have contributed, they are positively for the upliftment of the society, they should be highlighted. Their role should be highlighted in the textbooks. And that is one area we find missing. We are not pointing an accusing finger, but to follow the principle of equity and equality, which should start right from a classroom, which happens to be a miniature society. Equal importance should be given to both the gender. And in that sense, the significant contributions made by women leaders, notable women who have made a place, a mark for themselves in different fields, should also be highlighted. And there should not be any sort of discrimination or division, or children should not be grouped on the basis of their gender. As we discussed in the previous class, talent should always be genderless. Talent is genderless. So there should not be any division in the classroom based on gender. And more illustrations or pictures that reach out to small children especially should be provided in the textbooks. Illustrations that provide the multifaceted role of women, the different roles that women can take. This goes a long way in making an impact during the impressionistic years, during the early stages of growth. So more of such illustrations or more of such picturization should also be included as part of the textbook. And then again, in every classroom, the norms and rules of the society should be equally binding on both girls and boys. So these are some of the ways in which, to a certain extent, the bias prevailing in the education sector can be rectified. And then again, yet another area is, when leadership roles, when organizational roles are assigned, it should be irrespective of gender. Children at a very young age itself should grow up understanding that any role given to a girl or a boy, it is they are equally capable of performing the same. So these are some of the areas where some of the ways in which you can overcome the bias. Then, based on this discussion, you should now be in a better position to understand what are the basic causes. Why does such anomaly, why does such bias exist in the education sector? One of the most important causes responsible for this bias is the socio-economic status of the family. Naturally, children belonging to poor socio-economic background, the preference will be for the male child. Educating the male child, only then the next priority for the female child. So socio-economic factor happens to be one of the basic causes responsible for this bias. Then again, the violence meted out to women, to the girls, which force them to drop out. So very often we hear about, we hear in the media how the girl child is treated badly right from from a very young age, and this forces many of them to drop out from their studies. So that is yet another causative factor. Then again, the attitude of the society, which we have earlier mentioned. Unless there takes place a change in the perspective of the society, this sort of gender bias will continue to exist. But again, there is always a ray of hope. The NEP, the New Economic Policy of 2020, is a policy which is based on equity, policy which is based on inclusion, policy which is based on sustainability. Equity, inclusion and sustainability. These are the basic cornerstones of New Economic Policy 2020, and this policy, if implemented with all its positive side, will always play a great role in overcoming the gender bias. So with this, we will come to an end on the topic on gender bias in education sector. Thank you.